Family has a way of showing its true colors when one member begins to carve out success through sheer determination and skill. I discovered this truth in a way that left me questioning everything I had been taught about loyalty and love, all because of an old house that no one else believed in. Hello, everyone. I am Eleanor, 30 years old. Before I tell you the complete story of how everything changed, I want to ask that if these events resonate with you in any way, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue sharing stories like this one. Also, I would love to know where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Drop that information in the comments below. It all started 4 months ago during a family meeting my mother had called at the familiar mahogany dining table in the house where I grew up. My mother, who had turned 60 just a few weeks earlier, sat at the head with her hands folded neatly in front of her, and that same carefully measured smile she always used when delivering important news. My father, 62 years old and a man of few words during these gatherings, stood at her side and allowed her to speak for the both of them. My older sister Zoe sat across from me. Being 3 years older than me, she had long been the daughter my parents held up as the example to follow. My mother began by saying that she and my father had decided it was time to give both of us girls a real advantage as we moved forward in our lives. She slid 2 envelopes across the table. Zoe reached for the thicker one first and opened it with obvious anticipation. Inside, she found a polished brass key along with official documents for a 2-bedroom apartment in a prime downtown location within Salt Lake City. The apartment carried a market value of roughly $320,000. Zoe let out a loud cry of happiness and immediately embraced our mother while the two of them laughed and rocked back and forth in celebration. I opened my own envelope more slowly. All it contained was a single key covered in rust and a torn piece of paper bearing an address I did not recognize. I turned to my mother and asked what this was supposed to mean. She answered that the property needed quite a lot of work, but that I possessed the practical skills to take care of it. That was all she offered. There was no embrace, no words of encouragement, simply the statement that I was handy. My mother kept her gaze fixed on Zoe and continued to hold her close. Zoe looked at me then and said in a gentle voice that at least I had received something. The slight curl at the corner of her mouth told me everything I needed to know about how she truly felt. I placed the paper in my pocket and remained silent. Arguing would have changed nothing. What I could not have known then was that my mother had intentionally chosen the worst property from the old land records that had once belonged to my grandmother Clara. She had looked past several more manageable options and selected the one she thought would finally break my spirit. The next morning, I made the 50-minute drive out of Salt Lake City along the old highway that follows the base of the foothills. The landscape grew more open and rural with every mile until I turned onto a narrow gravel path that led through a stand of old trees. When the house appeared at the end of the drive, I stopped the car and sat there for several minutes, just taking it in. The roof had a pronounced sag on the left side that made the whole structure look off balance. 2 of the front windows were broken and had been covered with plastic sheeting that had turned yellow and brittle from years of sun. The porch steps were missing several boards and looked ready to collapse under any weight. Tall weeds had swallowed the entire yard, and the building itself leaned gently to one side as though it had accepted its fate. The smell reached me before I even stepped through the front door. It was a heavy mixture of mildew, decaying wood, and something that reminded me of a long-abandoned animal den. Once inside, I saw exposed wiring hanging from the ceiling, like dead vines pipes thick with rust, and a kitchen floor that had warped and buckled so badly it shifted and groaned beneath my boots. I walked back outside and lowered myself onto the single step that still felt solid. Then I took out my phone and called Marcus. He is a real estate attorney I have known since we were freshmen in college together, and he has always been the friend who listens without judgment no matter what time I reach out. I told him how bad the condition was. The roof was caving in places, the electrical system was a fire hazard, and there was no running water anywhere. He was quiet for a moment before asking if I wanted him to look into the deed right away. I said I needed a little time to absorb everything first. He stayed on the line with me in comfortable silence for several minutes, until I felt ready to end the call. After hanging up, I stayed on that porch step and let my thoughts turn to my grandmother, Clara. When I was 9 years old, she had spent patient hours teaching me how to use tools and build simple wooden projects in her garage. She would guide my hands across the grain of the wood and tell me that they often understood how to create and repair things long before my head figured out the steps. I had no way of knowing then that the call with Marcus would end up being the turning point that saved everything I was about to build. That same night, I sat in my truck with a notebook and a calculator, trying to figure out the scope of the project. A new roof would run about $12,000. Replacing the floors would add $7,000 more. Fixing the plumbing came to $6,000, while bringing the electrical system up to code would cost $8,000. Paint, drywall, and all the finishing fixtures pushed the total estimate to around $42,000. My savings account held approximately $15,700. I closed the notebook, opened it again, and started crossing items off the list based on what I could do myself. Because I had spent the past 12 years working as a home restoration contractor and custom millworker, I knew I could manage the installation of new subfloors, hanging drywall, painting every surface, and building custom cabinets and trim from scratch. These were the exact skills I had developed and perfected through years of hands-on projects for clients who wanted their old homes brought back to life. My family had never viewed my profession as a legitimate career path. In their eyes, I remained the daughter who came home covered in sawdust and wood shavings, while Zoe wore professional clothes to an office every day. On Monday morning, Zoe called me. Her voice had that particular sweet quality she used whenever she was preparing to say something unkind. She asked in a concerned tone whether I was really planning to live in that old place and suggested that selling it quickly might be the practical decision so I could find a small apartment somewhere closer to town. I told her I was going to make it work no matter what. There was a short pause before she wished me good luck with a note of condescension in her voice. Later that afternoon, my mother sent me a text message telling me not to waste my savings on a lost cause and reminding me that my father always knew what was best for the family. I did not respond. Instead, I drove directly to the hardware store and bought several £100 of lumber, along with the basic tools I would need to start the demolition and rebuilding process. The first week passed in a blur of physical labor. I spent every day on my hands and knees tearing out the rotten kitchen floor, hauling broken boards and debris to the rented dumpster, and measuring for the new subfloor I planned to install. Ruth, the neighbor from the house next door, was a practical woman in her mid-60s who wore reading glasses and spoke with a no-nonsense directness. She leaned over the fence one afternoon and watched me work for a while before commenting that it looked like an enormous amount of effort. I wiped sweat from my forehead and agreed. Without being asked, she went back inside and returned with a tall glass of ice water. As I drank, she mentioned that this land had belonged to my grandmother, Clara, many years ago. I looked at her in surprise and asked how she knew that detail. Ruth simply shrugged and said she had lived in the area for more than 30 years and had a good memory for who had owned each piece of property over time. I filed her words away in my mind, even though their meaning was not yet clear to me. By the end of that first week, I felt a small sense of accomplishment, mixed with the growing realization of how much work still lay ahead. The physical effort was exhausting, but there was also a quiet satisfaction in taking something broken and beginning to shape it into something solid with my own hands. My grandmother Clara had always believed I could do exactly that, even when the rest of my family could not see it. Over the following 7 weeks, the work on the house consumed nearly every waking hour. Each morning, I woke before sunrise and drove the 50 minutes from Salt Lake City out to the property with a thermos of coffee and a list of tasks for the day. The physical demands were constant. My shoulders ached from lifting heavy sheets of drywall, my knees protested after hours spent kneeling to secure new subfloor panels, and my hands grew calloused from the repetitive motion of sanding and hammering. Yet with every board I placed and every wall I straightened, the house began to feel less like a burden and more like something I was bringing back to life through my own effort. By the end of those 7 weeks, every dollar I had saved was gone. The $15,700 that once sat in my account now existed only as new lumber stacked in the living room, fresh drywall covering the old crumbling plaster, and a roof that no longer let rain pour through the ceilings. The kitchen had begun to take shape with cabinets I had designed and built myself from solid white oak, each one fitted with precise dovetail joints that would last for generations. The living room walls stood smooth and straight, painted a soft, warm white that made the space feel larger and brighter than I had imagined possible. When I pressed my palm against the finished surface, it felt solid and permanent beneath my touch. There was still one major problem I could not solve on my own. The original electrical wiring dated back to the 1960s and consisted of the old knob and tube system that was no longer considered safe by modern standards. I had replaced every section I could safely reach, but the main service panel needed to be upgraded by a licensed electrician. That work would cost between $4,000 and $6,000, money I simply did not have. For the time being, I ran temporary wiring through protective conduit along the baseboards and ceiling. It was safe enough for now and passed a basic visual inspection, but I wrote the words "electrical priority," "licensed electrician needed soon" in my project notebook and underlined them twice. To keep some money coming in, I began taking on small restoration projects in the evenings after the sun went down. I built custom cutting boards from scraps of walnut and maple for local clients, and I completed a reclaimed wood dining table for a couple who lived in the next town over. Each job brought in $60 or $90, sometimes a little more. It was not enough to replace my savings, but it kept the lights on and allowed me to buy the occasional box of screws or can of paint when I ran low. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my mother appeared at the house without any warning. She simply walked through the front door as though she still owned the place and began moving slowly from room to room. She ran her fingers along the mantel I had carefully restored from the original fireplace surround, opened one of the cabinet doors I had built, and let it swing shut on its own, and pressed her palm against the countertop I had sanded and sealed by hand. She offered no words of praise or encouragement. After several minutes of silent inspection, she finally spoke. She said the work was not bad, but that I should not get too attached to any of it. The way she looked at the house was not the look of a parent proud of her daughter's accomplishments. It was the calculating gaze of someone appraising an investment. A couple of days later, I drove into Salt Lake City to pick up a drill I had lent to Zoe several months earlier. When I arrived at her apartment building, I knocked on her door, but she called out that she was busy and asked me to leave the tool on the mat. I had already turned to go when I noticed more than a dozen large delivery boxes stacked outside her door. There were shoe boxes, garment bags still sealed in plastic, and a large flat-screen television wrapped in its original foam packaging. The boxes were piled so high they nearly blocked the welcome mat. I knocked again and told her I only needed the drill for a few minutes. Her voice came through the door, sounding thin and stretched thin. She repeated that she was busy. As I stepped back, I could see through the narrow gap beneath the door that the living room light was flickering. She was watching television in the middle of a weekday afternoon. Then her phone rang inside the apartment. She answered, and her voice dropped to a low whisper, the kind people use when they do not want anyone nearby to overhear. She told our mother that the credit card company had been calling nonstop and that she just needed a little more time. There was a pause. Then she said, "Please do not tell Father." My mother's voice came through the speaker clearly enough for me to hear. She told Zoe they would figure it out together and reminded her not to say anything to my father. I stood in that hallway for a long moment before I quietly walked away. I did not confront her. I told myself it was not my business and that Zoe would have to handle her own problems. But as I sat in my truck in the parking lot, the memory I had tried to push away for years rose to the surface with sudden clarity. I was 16 years old at the time. I had walked into the kitchen and seen Zoe taking money from our grandmother Clara's purse while grandmother napped in the next room. She pulled out a $20 bill and then a 50. When I told my mother and father what I had seen that evening, they did not question Zoe. Instead, they turned on me. My mother accused me of making up stories about my sister out of jealousy. My father told me to stop causing trouble in the family. In that moment, I learned a hard lesson about how truth worked in our household. The truth only seemed to count when it came from the daughter my parents had already decided to believe. Now sitting in my truck outside Zoe's building, I could not stop wondering how much she actually owed and what would happen when the full extent of it finally came to light. 11 weeks after I first turned the rusty key in the lock, the house had become almost unrecognizable. The new subfloor was level and solid beneath my feet. The drywall I had hung and taped myself created clean, flat surfaces throughout every room. The roof no longer leaked when the occasional summer rain swept across the valley. In the kitchen, the cabinets I had designed and built stood in perfect alignment, their white oak doors fitted with brass hardware that caught the light coming through the new windows. The living room felt warm and inviting with its fresh coat of paint, and the fireplace around I had painstakingly restored to its original 1967 condition. I took a few photographs of the progress and shared them online. The comments came in quickly from friends I had not spoken to in years, from old classmates, and even from strangers who had never met me. Many of them wrote that the transformation was incredible and asked whether I had really done all the work myself. Others called it inspiring and said it gave them hope for their own projects. For the first time in my life, I felt as though people outside of Marcus were truly seeing the value of what I could create with my hands. It was a small but powerful kind of recognition I had never received from my own family. Then one evening, without any warning, my mother and father arrived at the house together. My mother walked in first and began moving through the rooms with the same appraising silence she had shown on her previous visit. My father followed a few steps behind his hands in his pockets, watching her more than he watched the house itself. After several minutes, my mother stopped in the center of the living room and turned to face me. She said she and my father had been talking. Zoe had run into complications with her downtown apartment and could no longer stay there. They had decided the house would be better for Zoe. The paperwork was still in their names, and they had the final say. She told me I had 72 hours to move out. My hands began to shake. I pressed them flat against the countertop I had built and sealed myself. My mother continued speaking in that practiced soft voice, saying they would make it up to me somehow, and that this was simply what was best for the family. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I looked at both of them and said only that I needed to make a phone call. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor I had installed with my own hands, my back resting against the cabinets I had built from scratch. I called the one person who had never made me feel small or foolish for trying. Marcus answered on the first ring. I told him everything that had happened. My mother's unexpected visit, the demand for 72 hours, the claim that the paperwork remained in their names, and the explanation that Zoe needed the house because of complications with her apartment. Marcus was quiet for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted into the precise, measured tone he used when he was thinking like an attorney rather than a friend. He asked whether the deed was actually in my mother's name. I told him she had said it was, but that she had never shown me any paperwork. He asked if I had ever received a copy of a transfer document or anything that had been notarized. I said no. She had always told me she would handle everything. There was another pause. Then Marcus asked the question that changed everything. He asked who actually owned the land the house stood on. I remembered Ruth's words from weeks earlier. This land used to belong to my grandmother Clara. Marcus repeated the question. Used to, or does it still? I told him I did not know. He told me to give him 24 hours. He said not to sign anything, not to move anything out of the house, and not to respond to my mother or father until he had a chance to look into the records. I told him I had not been planning to do any of those things. He said good. Then his voice softened just slightly, and he told me he had been waiting for me to let him help. The small crack in his voice made me realize he had been watching me carry this entire project alone for weeks without pushing. I ended the call and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time. The house around me was no longer the ruin I had first walked into. It was something I had shaped with my own hands, something that finally felt like it belonged to me in a way my family had never understood. Yet according to my mother, I was supposed to walk away from it in 72 hours. Later that same night, I picked up the phone again and dialed my grandmother Clara's number with shaking hands. It rang 4 times before she answered. Her voice sounded thinner than I remembered, but it was steady and clear. I told her everything that had happened since the day my mother first handed me the rusty key. The months of work, the money I had poured into the house, the sudden demand that I leave so Zoe could have it, and the claim that the paperwork was still in my parents' names. I told her about the trust Marcus had mentioned and about Ruth, saying the land had once belonged to her. My grandmother listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said she had been waiting for this call. She told me she had set up a trust for me and for no one else. She had done it the year I turned 18 because she had seen how my mother and father treated me, and she wanted to make sure I would have something of my own one day. She said the land and the house on it had always been meant for me. Her voice grew quiet but firm when she added that she was not gone yet, and that she was coming to see me in person. There was one more thing she needed to tell me, but she wanted to say it face to face. Before I could ask any questions, she ended the call. I sat in the dark kitchen with the phone still in my hand and felt something shift inside my chest. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I was not facing my mother and father completely alone. My grandmother Clara was on her way, and whatever she had to tell me would change everything that happened next. The next evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table I had built from reclaimed pine and spread out 3 stacks of paper in front of me. Stack 1 was the trust deed. My grandmother Clara had established a revocable living trust back in 2012, naming herself as trustee and me as the sole beneficiary. The trust held the property at this address, the land, and every improvement on it. It had been properly notarized and recorded with the county. It was airtight. Stack 2 contained every building permit, every contractor receipt, every material invoice from the past 11 weeks. All of them were in my name. When I had pulled the permits from the city office, I had signed as Eleanor property occupant and trust beneficiary. The city had approved them under my name, not my mother's. Stack 3 was a screenshot of a message my aunt had accidentally sent to the family group chat. It read that Zoe owed over $65,000 in credit card debt and that my mother knew but had not told my father yet. Marcus tapped the trust deed. My mother had no legal claim. She could not transfer what she did not own. She could not evict me from my own property. The 72 hours was nothing more than a loud bluff. I exhaled for what felt like the first full breath in days. So what do? Marcus leaned back and said nothing yet. We wait for them to make their move in public, then we respond. Because my mother had built this lie in front of the entire family, telling everyone the house was hers to give. That lie needed to fall in front of the same audience. He stood to leave and reminded me to get the temporary wiring fixed or properly documented. Everything in the house needed to be clean. I nodded and wrote it in my notebook, but there was no time to call an electrician yet. What happened next changed everything anyway. The phone rang at 8 the next morning. It was my mother's younger sister, her voice low and rushed, as if she were calling from a bathroom with the faucet running to cover her words. She told me my mother was planning a housewarming party for Zoe at the house the very next day. She had invited 20 people and was telling everyone that I had agreed to it, that I was happy to give the house to Zoe, that it had been my idea all along. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger yet, but something quieter that had been building for 30 years. I asked why she was telling me. She hesitated, then said because she had sent that message about Zoe's debt by accident, and now my mother would not speak to her. And because she had watched the family punish me for being the easy one to punish for too long. It was not right. It never had been. I hung up and called Marcus with 2 words: "It is tomorrow." He said he would be there. No hesitation. And so would my grandmother Clara. She was already on her way, even though she was 79 years old with a bad hip and drove a Buick older than I was. She had called him that morning. That night, I sat in the small workshop I rented behind the hardware store on 5th Street. It smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, 2 of the best smells in the world. I ran a sheet of fine grit sandpaper over a scrap of walnut back and forth, the rhythm steadying my pulse. I thought about how my entire family had constructed a story about me. In their story, I was the selfish one, the unreasonable one, the one tearing the family apart. And now they were inviting an audience to watch me play my part. I set my alarm for 6 the next morning. I would walk into my own house either for the last time or the first. I arrived at 9. The front door, the one I had stripped, sanded, and restained by hand, stood propped open with a doorstop I had never seen before. Inside the house looked nothing like the place I had been restoring. My mother had been there since dawn. New throw pillows covered the couch I had reupholstered. A tablecloth I had not bought lay across the table. Platters of food covered the countertops I had installed. Pink and gold balloons hung from the living room archway, along with a glitter banner that read, "Welcome home, Zoe." 20 people filled the rooms. Aunts, uncles, cousins, my mother's book club. Friends, 3 neighbors I had only waved to before. They held paper plates and plastic cups, chatting as if this were a normal celebration. Zoe stood in the center of the living room, her hair blown out, wearing a new dress. She was laughing. My father had his hand on her shoulder in a proud pose, his chest out. When he saw me in the doorway, his voice carried across the room. He said, "I had come to congratulate my sister. That is what family does." Every head turned. 20 smiles aimed at me like heat lamps. My mother appeared at my elbow with a glass of lemonade and told me to be gracious, that this was hard for all of us. My great-aunt patted my arm and said what a generous thing I had done, giving my sister this beautiful house. I looked at her and said I had not given anyone anything. The pats stopped. My father's voice dropped low, a warning. "Not here." Zoe glided over her voice like silk. She said we had talked about this. It was for the best. I looked around at 20 pairs of eyes, not one of them knowing the truth, all of them looking at me like I was the villain. Outside the window, I caught a glimpse of Ruth standing on her porch, watching through the glass, slowly shaking her head. It happened in the kitchen, my kitchen. Zoe followed me in, and the moment we were out of earshot, the mask fell. She said I should thank her for what I asked, for giving me a reason to finally do something with my life, she said. She leaned against the island I had built from scratch white oak and brass hardware and examined her nails. She said I would still be sanding chairs in that sad little workshop if it were not for her. My jaw tightened. I built this kitchen, I told her. These cabinets, that island, with my own hands. And now they are mine, she said, as if reading a weather report. That is how it works in this family, Eleanor. I thought you understood that by now. She opened a cabinet. Inside were my mother's casserole dishes and serving bowls, already unpacked and at home. She pulled out a glass, filled it from the faucet I had connected, drank, and looked at me over the rim. My father had said I could take my tools when I left. She did not need them. She walked back into the living room. I heard my father's voice rise over the noise, calling for everyone's attention. I followed her out. He stood by the fireplace, the surround I had restored from the original 1967 woodwork, raising a glass. To family, he said, and to Zoe's beautiful new home. 20 glasses lifted. 20 voices repeated it. To Zoe. I stood in the back of the room, my hands fists at my sides, my throat burning, but I did not say a word. Not yet. I was listening for something. A knock at the door. A car pulling into the driveway. Any second now. I know some of you watching are probably shouting at your screens right now. Trust me, I was shouting inside too. But if you have ever been the one your family took for granted, the one they expected to just go along with whatever they decided, drop a comment below. And if you want to see what happened when I finally stopped being silent, make sure you are subscribed, because it is coming. My father was in the middle of saying something about sacrifice and what it means to provide for your children when the knock came. 3 sharp, firm, professional raps. My mother glanced at the door. No one moved. I did. I crossed the room and opened the front door. Marcus stood on the porch in a gray suit leather briefcase in hand. His face was calm, but I could see the edge in his posture, ready. He nodded at me once. Behind him, moving slowly up the porch steps and gripping a carved wooden cane with both hands, was my grandmother Clara. She was 79 years old, her silver hair pinned back, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. My father's voice came from behind me. Who invited you? Marcus stepped inside. No one, he said. I am Miss Holloway's legal counsel. My mother said she did not need a lawyer, that this was a family matter. With respect, Marcus replied, property transfer is a legal matter. The room went still. 20 people holding plates and cups froze mid-bite. Zoe's smile dissolved. Then my grandmother Clara walked in. I took her arm. She patted my hand without looking at me. Her eyes locked on my mother. She surveyed the room slowly, taking in the balloons, the banner, the food on counters I had built. She read the glitter letters. Welcome home, Zoe. She turned to my mother. The room held its breath. She said one sentence, quiet and clear, the kind that lands like a gavel. Aubrey, whose land do you think this is? My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. My grandmother pulled out a chair, sat down, and folded her hands on the table. Sit down, she said to both of them. You are going to want to sit for this. Marcus opened his briefcase. The click of the latches was the loudest sound in the room. He pulled out a document, crisp, bound, notarized, and set it on the table so everyone could see the county seal. If I may have the room's attention, he said, his voice not loud but not needing to be. This property, the land, and every structure on it is held in a revocable living trust established by Clara in 2012. The sole beneficiary is Eleanor. My mother took a step forward. That is not possible. My grandmother's voice cut the room like a blade. She did not raise it. She did not need to. I gave you nothing, Aubrey. I let you use the address for mail. I let you believe what you wanted. But I never transferred the title. It was never yours. Marcus continued. Mrs. Holloway, you hold no deed, no title, and no legal authority to transfer this property to anyone. Furthermore, every building permit, every contractor invoice, every material receipt for the renovations performed over the past 11 weeks is filed under Eleanor Holloway's name. She is the legal owner of all improvements. The county recorder's office can verify every page. My mother's voice cracked. Mother, how could you do this to us? My grandmother looked at her daughter-in-law, steady and unblinking. I did this for Eleanor because you two could not. The room began to shift. 20 people who had walked in thinking this was a housewarming were realizing they had been invited to a lie. My great-aunt turned to my mother. You told us this was your house? My mother said nothing. Her face had gone the color of raw steak. Then my grandmother added quietly to no one and to everyone that she had set up the trust the year Eleanor turned 18 because she had seen how they treated her and she had planned ahead. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Zoe stepped forward. Her hands were shaking. Her perfect composure, the armor she had worn her entire life, was cracking at the seams. This does not change anything, she said. Mother and father said. My father cut in sharply. Zoe, be quiet. No. Her voice pitched high and desperate. I need this house. I do not have anywhere else to go. The room froze. Not whispers now, but silence that swallowed sound. My father turned to her slowly. What do you mean you do not have anywhere else? Zoe's eyes were wet. Her lips moved before her brain caught up. The apartment. I lost it. I could not keep up with the payments. My father stared at her, then at my mother, who had been clutching a dish towel to her chest like a lifeline. You lost the apartment, he said. The apartment we gave you 4 months ago. My mother's chin dropped. Lucas, I was going to tell you. You knew, he said. The room ruptured. 20 people watched as my father's face cycled through shock, betrayal, and fury. Zoe was crying now, real tears, mascara streaking. My mother was crying too, reaching for his arm. He pulled away like her hand was on fire. My aunt stared at the floor. My great-aunt picked up her purse. I think we should all go home, she said quietly. People started moving. Coats keys mumbled goodbyes. No one looked at my mother. No one looked at Zoe. They looked at me with quick, uncertain glances and then away. I stood in the corner of the room, my grandmother's hand in mine. I had not moved. I had not spoken. My father turned to me. His voice was broken glass. You planned this. I met his eyes. No, I said. You and Mother planned this. I just showed up. The house emptied. Paper plates on the counter. Half-eaten casseroles. A balloon drifted across the floor and settled against the wall. My mother and father sat on the sofa, my sofa that I had reupholstered from a thrift store frame. Zoe was somewhere outside. I could hear her crying in her car through the open window. Marcus stepped forward and held out a white envelope. This is a formal cease and desist letter, he said to my mother and father. You are not to enter this property again without Eleanor's written consent. Any attempt to claim ownership, alter locks, or contact her with threats regarding this property will be documented and forwarded to the county district attorney's office. My mother looked at the envelope. She did not take it. Marcus set it on the coffee table. Everything is documented, he said. The trust deed, the permits, the receipts. The law is clear. My mother turned to me, her eyes swollen. Eleanor, please. Please, what I asked. Please give up. Please be the easy one again. Please fold, so you do not have to face the mess you made. I did not say any of that. What I said was, Mother, I love you, but loving someone does not mean letting them take everything from you. My mother's face crumbled. My father stood. He did not look at me. He did not look at Marcus. He did not look at his mother. My grandmother, still seated, still holding her cane, spoke one last time. You could have been proud of her, she said to both of them. That would have cost you nothing. My father walked out the front door without a word. My mother followed. The car started. Gravel crunched. Then it was quiet. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. You okay? I looked around the room. The banner hung crooked. A cup of lemonade sweated on the mantel I had restored. Not yet, I said. But I will be. That evening, I changed the locks on the front door. I did it myself. 4 screws, a new deadbolt, a brass handle I had been saving for the right moment. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. It was just hardware, but it felt like drawing a line in concrete. Ruth came over with a pot of yellow chrysanthemums. She set it on the porch railing and looked at me through her reading glasses. I always knew that house was yours, honey. Your grandparents built it together back in 1968. I was 17. I watched them carry the lumber. I held the pot and let that settle into me. 1968. My grandparents' hands on this same frame. My grandmother's trust protecting it decades later. And now my hands finishing what theirs started. I tore down the banner, popped the balloons, swept the floors, loaded the leftover food into bags for Ruth and her neighbor, and then I sat in the middle of the living room, the room I had rebuilt from bare studs, in perfect silence. It was the first silence that was not fear. It was just quiet. My phone buzzed. Marcus, get that electrical work done, Eleanor. Seriously. I called the electrician and scheduled it for the following week. Then, while clearing my mother's things from the hall closet, I found something. A letter in a yellowed envelope, no stamp hand delivered and hidden. The handwriting was my grandmother Clara's. My dear Eleanor, your grandfather and I built that house together in 1968, the summer we married. I always meant for it to go to someone who would love it the way we did. It was always meant for you. The letter was dated 5 years ago. My mother and father had hidden it. 5 years of my grandmother's words stuffed behind someone else's coats. I pressed the letter to my chest. I thought that was the end. It was not. Over the next weeks, the fallout spread like water finding cracks. My great-aunt stopped returning my mother's calls. She told my aunt she was deeply embarrassed to share a last name with people who would treat their own daughter that way. My cousin Katie, my great-aunt's daughter and close to my age, called me one Tuesday night. She said she had always thought something was off but had not known what it was. Nobody had asked. She was sorry. No one had stood up for me sooner. My father's position as an honorary elder advisor at his church, a title he had held for years, built on the image of a devoted family man, quietly disappeared. The pastor simply stopped calling. His name was removed from the weekly bulletin. No announcement, just absence. My mother went dark on social media. No more family photos. No more posts about being blessed to have her girls. For the first time in years, her profile picture was a sunset instead of a family portrait. Zoe received her first call from a collections agency, then her second. Without my mother and father running interference, the $65,000 of credit card debt was entirely in her name. Ruth told me one morning over the fence that my father had come by the previous Tuesday. He had stood outside the house for 10 minutes just looking at it. Then he drove away. I did not know what to do with that, so I filed it away with everything else I was not ready to feel. Then an email arrived from a reporter at Utah Home and Heritage magazine. She had found my renovation photographs online and wanted to feature the house. She wanted to know who had done the work my mother had never called a real career. My father called one Thursday afternoon while I was in my workshop fitting a mortise joint for a client's bookcase. His name flashed on my screen and my hands went still. I answered. He said we needed to talk. His voice was tired, worn like a tool used without maintenance. I told him I was listening. He said my grandmother was not thinking clearly. She was old. She did not understand what she had done with that trust. We should contest it, he said. The family should have a say. He would get a lawyer. We can try, I told him. But she set up that trust with her own attorney. It has been notarized, recorded, and active for over a decade. Grandmother Clara is perfectly competent. You know that. Silence. I could hear him breathing. I am your father, he said finally. That land should have been mine. It was never yours, I said. I set down the chisel. And neither am I. The line went quiet for so long, I checked to see if he had hung up. He had not. You are making a mistake, he said at last. The same flat, dismissive tone he had used when I told him I was becoming a restoration contractor instead of something more conventional. No, I kept my voice even. I made a mistake every time I believed you and Mother would treat me fairly. That is over now. I ended the call. My thumb shook over the screen. I wanted to tell you it felt powerful. It did not. It felt like pulling a splinter out of a wound that had been infected for years. Necessary, painful, and long overdue. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I was on the porch sealing a window frame when I heard a car pull into the gravel drive. The engine cut. A door opened and did not close for a long time. Zoe walked up the path. No makeup, her hair pulled back in a knot. She wore a sweatshirt I had never seen before, gray, and too big for her, the kind of thing she would never have been caught dead in before. Her eyes were swollen. She looked 10 years older than she had at the housewarming. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, my porch steps, the ones I had rebuilt. "I am not here to ask for the house," she said. I set down the brush. "Then why I do not know how to fix my life, Eleanor." Her voice was raw. No performance, no practiced sweetness, just a woman drowning. "I owe $65,000. I have not slept in a week. The collections people call every morning at 7. I looked at my older sister, and for the first time I did not see the golden child. I did not see the one who always got the bigger portion, the warmer hug, the louder applause. I saw someone who had been handed everything and taught nothing. Someone who had never learned to build because she had never had to. "I cannot fix that for you," I said. "And I will not. But I can give you the number of a financial counselor Marcus knows. The rest is on you." She nodded, wiped her face, and turned to go. At the bottom step she stopped, reached into her bag, pulled out a small cardboard box and set it on the railing. "I am sorry," she said. "For the kitchen. For all of it." I looked at her. "I hear you. I did not say I forgive you because I was not there yet. And I did not owe anyone forgiveness on a timeline that was not my own." After her car disappeared down the gravel road, I opened the box. Inside were 2 thin silver bracelets. My grandmother had given them to us when we were young, one for each of us. Zoe had kept both for 15 years. 1 month later, a photographer stood in my living room with a DSLR camera and a reflector board. The reporter from Utah Home and Heritage was named Dana. She was in her 40s, all business with a tape recorder and a notebook full of questions. She walked through every room, touching the trim work, crouching to examine the dovetailed joints on the kitchen cabinets, running her palm along the fireplace surround. "Who did the millwork?" she asked. "I did. And the floors? Me. The cabinetry? Also me." She looked up from her notebook. "Who taught you to build?" I smiled. "My grandmother." The article ran 3 weeks later. The title was "Rising from Ruin: How One Woman Rebuilt a Neglected Utah Home with Her Own Hands." 4 pages, 12 photographs. They used the before and after of the kitchen as the center spread. Ruth appeared in one of the photos, leaning on the fence between our yards, grinning, and holding up a glass of lemonade like a toast. Within a week, I received 3 custom furniture commissions: a large dining table, a set of bookshelves, and a nursery crib in white ash. My workshop finally had a name. I called it Clara's Legacy Restorations. I hung the sign myself. Marcus called to congratulate me. The trust is fully recorded. Title insurance is done. No one can touch it. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything. That is what friends are for," he said. A beat. "Now please tell me you called the electrician." I laughed. Actually laughed. "Done. Last week. Full panel replacement. New wiring. Inspection passed. Thank God," he said. That weekend I received an email from the community center in Salt Lake City. They wanted to know if I would teach a woodworking workshop for women. I said yes. The class filled in 3 days. My grandmother Clara came to stay for a week in early June. She arrived in the Buick with flats of marigolds, a bag of potting soil, and a photo album I had never seen. We planted the flowers in the front yard side by side on our knees in the dirt, just the way she had taught me to work with wood. Slow, steady, with your whole hand. She told me this was the exact spot where she and my grandfather had planted their first garden the summer they married in 1968. Marigolds and zinnias, the same flowers. "Your grandfather would have loved what you did with the kitchen," she said, pressing soil around a seedling. "I found your letter," I told her, "the one Mother and Father hid." She did not look up. I wrote 3 letters. They hid all of them. But you are here now, baby. That is what matters. 3 letters. 3 attempts to reach me. 3 times my mother and father stood between us and decided I did not deserve to hear from the woman who loved me most. We sat on the porch when the sun got low, the porch I had rebuilt. Ruth brought over a pitcher of lemonade without being asked. It had become a ritual. The new neighbors across the road, a young couple who had moved in the month before, waved from their driveway. I waved back. My grandmother reached over and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was iron. "The best revenge is not revenge at all," she said. "It is the life you build after." I looked out at the yard, the marigolds, the fresh paint, the house that had been a ruin 4 months ago. I had not received fairness from my family, but I had built it for myself with concrete and oak, and the truth. "I know, grandmother," I said. She squeezed my hand. "I know." A week after she left, I sat down at my desk, the one I had built from reclaimed cherry, the first piece of furniture I had ever sold, and I wrote an email. "Mother, Father, I love you. That has not changed, but I will not accept being treated as less than. I will not be the daughter you take from to give to someone else. I will not shrink so that someone else can fill the space. If you want a relationship with me, it starts with respect. Not control. Not obligation. Not guilt. I am not closing the door, but I am choosing who gets to walk through it." Eleanor, I hit send. I did not get a reply. Not that day, not that week. And for the first time, I was okay with the silence because it was my silence now. I had chosen it. It had not been pushed on me. On a Friday evening, I sat in the living room. The house was quiet. Through the window, I could see Ruth's porch light and the marigolds in the yard. The road led to town where 3 clients were waiting for furniture I had designed. On my workbench inside the top drawer sat the 2 silver bracelets Zoe had returned. I did not wear them, but I had not thrown them away either. Someday they might mean something different, but not today. I looked around this room. Every surface told a story. The floors my knees remembered. The walls my arms ached from. The cabinets my grandmother's hands had inspired. This was not the house my mother and father had given me. That house had been a ruin, a punishment, a message that said I was worth less. This house was the one I built, and I was the one who decided what it meant. I did not know what would happen next with my family, but I knew what would happen next with me, because for the first time in 30 years, that was my call. You know, when I started this story, I thought the house was the point, the renovation, the trust. The moment my mother's face went white in front of 20 people. And yes, all of that mattered. But sitting here now on this porch my grandparents built and my hands restored, I realized the house was never really the thing. The thing was the moment I stopped waiting for my family to see my worth and started building it for myself. I had spent 30 years being the easy one, the one who folded, the one who absorbed. And I had told myself that was love, that keeping the peace was the same as being at peace. It is not. It is just silence with a nicer name. I will not tell you what to do with your family. I do not know your story. I do not know your mother or your Zoe or the specific way they have learned to make you feel small. But I will tell you 3 things I wish someone had told me a long time ago. Boundaries are not punishment. They are not walls you build to hurt people. They are doors, and you get to decide who walks through. Your hands know things your head has not figured out yet. My grandmother said that to me when I was 9, and I am only now understanding what she meant. Sometimes you have to start building before you believe you can. And the last one, the hardest one. You do not owe anyone a version of yourself that makes their life more comfortable at the cost of your own. That is it. That is what the ruin taught me. Now I am curious. If this story reminded you of a line you needed to draw with someone you love, comment my boundaries below. I read every single one. If you want another story like this one, there is a video in the description I think you will love. Hit subscribe if this one meant something to you, and I will see you next time.